So my name's Stephen Running. I'm a Regents Professor of Global Ecology at the University of Montana. I've been doing global ecology and global climate since the 1980s. My own personal research is writing software for NASA satellites, but over the last 10 or 15 years, I've ended up more in not only the climate science, but the climate policy and politics. I was an IPCC author in 2007, and we got quite notoriety for the Nobel Peace Prize that year. An author on the National Climate Assessment, and so I've been in the climate science and politics trenches for a long time.
Yeah. Tell me sort of current updates. What's the number one piece of climate news that's concerning? And then what's the number one piece of climate news that's uplifting?
Boy, the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef this year was of some concern. We don't know how permanent that is. And of course, the ongoing melt out of the Arctic sea ice is something that we follow with our satellites with very high accuracy. In a way, it sounds a little crazy, but there's not that much new in the pure climate science. We've been measuring the critical measurements for years and decades now, and so we're really at a point of adding another point on existing graphs. We, of course, and the public does too, I think separate measurements, which are a look at the past history to the present, versus projections forward, which are all computer models. If there's anything we see all too often is that our computer models projecting forward on various measures turn out to be too slow, and that things are happening in many cases faster than our best models thought they would. And Arctic sea ice is a good example of that. Probably the best news I have is how rapidly we've turned the corner on the coal industry. The world would be better off when the very last coal plant shuts down. And we've actually made amazing progress in just the last year or two at backing away from coal-powered electricity, particularly in the U.S., but even around the world. We're now having China talk very clearly about backing out of coal-fired electricity. Even India, which only a couple years ago was still planning this big upward development of coal-powered electricity, is starting to change their mind. So that's probably the best big good news.
Wow. We could literally stop burning every other form of carbon, but if the one exception is coal, all bets are still kind of off.
Yeah, coal is the single biggest carbon emission source of everything in the world. And that's the bad news. The good news is most of it's used for electric power production, and we have lots of other choices.
Yeah.
There's some of our problems where we don't have very many choices, and that's going to be hard to work with, like jet aircraft, for example. But when it comes to generating electric power, we have tons of other choices, and coal has had its day. The medical community has been trying to limit coal use for years for health purposes, and now the climate topic comes along and just doubles down on the whole issue.
Puts the nails in the coffin.
And to me, one of the things that is most galling is that the coal industry has always bragged about how their electric power is the cheapest. Now we're finding out in spades how they've been gaming the system to avoid paying royalties for decades. They've avoided paying their bonding for their reclamation costs, and so no wonder it's cheap. They've been avoiding their most fundamental responsibilities to society, and we've been letting them get away with it. And it's very good now that there is intense scrutiny on these topics of how they've gamed their royalty system, how they've self-bonded, quote unquote, their reclamation costs, which meant not paying a thing. Wyoming's in huge trouble for this now. And so turns out their coal-fired electric power wasn't as cheap as they claimed if they were actually paying honest cost. And I think we're getting to the point where we're going to force them to do it.
Let's switch gears to the election now. One of the biggest criticisms of Hillary Clinton is that she's promoted fracking all over the world. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on fracking, on her actual history with fracking, and how that relates to climate change and also relates to everything you're saying about coal.
Well, I think in the beginning, fracking actually did sound like a pretty good deal if it would supplant coal. And so I think before the real scrutiny got going about what fracking was actually doing, a lot of people, and certainly politicians that don't actually follow technical details, they started hearing about fracking and saying, wow, if we can close down coal and jump onto natural gas with this clever new fracking, that sounds like a good deal. I think it was an honest mistake of a lot of people, probably even myself for a while, that as we first heard of fracking and we heard it as a substitute for coal, we said, wow, this sounds like a good deal. And I think it only later, as more and more scrutiny came up about collateral costs and damage of fracking and the water consumption and the methane leakage, and that you start being less enthusiastic about frack gas. I mean, we still have to acknowledge that a lot of our reduction in coal consumption is because of natural gas from however it came. And so we can't kid ourselves that all this reduction is all because of solar panels. We wish that was true, but it actually isn't. And so I think it's appropriate now that the gas industry is getting the sort of technical scrutiny it's needed. And some of the worst of the fracking problems are being addressed, because we're going to need natural gas for a while. And it is half the carbon cost per unit energy of coal. That's a big step. But they have to do a way better job of producing it than they have been.
So you agree it is a good bridge fuel to get us off of coal?
I think I hate to say good, but I think it's a necessary bridge fuel until we can get enough capacity of all our renewables up and going. I separate coal from oil and gas completely, and you'll notice in their lobbying they do the same thing. The coal industry's on their own, and oil and gas have their separate lobbying. I think they know darn well that coal is something they don't want to be associated with. It's hard to defend coal in any way, shape, or form. And the international transport of it, and the coal mines, and burning, on and on it goes. The faster that closes down, the better. And to me, it's a separate topic of what other energy forms take its place. It's just so clear that quitting coal is the first thing to do everywhere as fast as we can. I think we're turning the corner on coal, but you then have to reset the calculus for what happens next. And how much fracked gas fills that or doesn't fill it is very regionally specific.
You've explained how fracking is perhaps a necessary evil at the moment. And so even if the worst of the identifications of Hillary Clinton with fracking are true, it sounds like you've used the word honest mistake. Maybe we can kind of give her a pass on that. There are some people who are going to say she's so corrupt and this goes to sort of the trustworthiness issue. There's a bunch of people, they just won't believe anything she says. So if she talks about rah, we got to fight climate change, a bunch of people say, well, she says all kinds of things, and I don't believe a word she says. Do you think, even if that is true, that she's completely untrustworthy, she's completely corrupt, is there some benefit to her even stating we need to deal with climate change? Is that enough of a reason to say she's a better choice than Trump? Even if
Well, and she's already said it. She's already said it in both debates, and she may say it again tonight. And so she said the simple, direct words. And the fact that Trump has made no bones about he has nothing to do with this topic. He would back out of the Paris Treaty if he got a chance. All his best friends are from the oil and coal industry. I mean, this isn't even a hard decision. I mean, I've voted for tons of politicians in my life that I wasn't thrilled about, but I knew they were better than the alternative. And so you don't have to love somebody to vote for them. You just have to figure that they can do a better job than the alternative candidate. And in this case, it's so shockingly obvious on so many different topics. I've never seen an idiot like Trump try to run for president and so many people sucker for it. And I don't say that from a climate point of view. I say that from just a political maturity point of view. I mean, the guy's just stunning, his lack of knowledge and his lack of interest. He doesn't even seem to prep for these debates because he doesn't seem to care that he doesn't know the facts on anything. So anybody that isn't thrilled about Hillary has to realize that's, from the point of view of the vote, just out of necessity. I'm sorry, that's the wrong question. It's, do you want to keep Trump out of the White House or don't you? I can understand how, especially Bernie Sanders supporters, were very much motivated by Bernie. I thought it was so cool what this old guy, he's even older than me, how he fired up the crowd. It was just cool to watch. The way he got people, I hate to say kids, but I'll say kids engaged in the political process. There's no doubt Hillary is kind of a corporate suit sort of lifetime politician. However, now we have to fast forward to reality. We have to understand that it might be tempting to lodge a protest vote for one of the minor candidates. Those of you that weren't voting in the year 2000 need to understand that Al Gore would have been president if Ralph Nader hadn't been the spoiler on the side. And Ralph Nader is a solid guy. A lot of his career I have high respect for, but he basically ruined Al Gore's presidency, and we ended up with Dick Cheney for 8 years. And so it is not funny to think that, oh yeah, I'm going to just protest and vote for one of these other candidates to teach Hillary a lesson. The lesson you might teach is that Donald Trump ends up president, and that would be such a disaster that it's hard to imagine. This is the fourth quarter, and there's no time for theoretical arguments here. We have to understand that we could end up with a President Trump that would absolutely wreck climate. I know Hillary is not a warm, fuzzy candidate, but I think she is solid on the climate topic. And I know a number of my friends deal at the White House level with science topics, and they've spent lots of time, like John Bolton, for example, with the Obama White House, and with Hillary when she was in the State Department. And I think she'll come through on the climate topic. You don't have to like somebody in order to vote for them. You have to get past that. You have to recognize that protest votes for candidates that have no chance have serious consequences. And if you don't believe me, go look up the history of the 2000 election and think about the 8 years of George Bush as president. compared to what it would have been with Al Gore's push. Periodically have this problem where the two main candidates are less than rousingly popular. Third party candidate tries to bubble up. You have to recognize in countries that don't have a two-party system, they often have hung elections where they have no party with a majority. They have to cobble together governments based on this fractional support of 4 or 5 different parties, and then their governments collapse all the time. Italy is a great example. Trying to push a third party candidate forward right now is the wrong time to go after. Starting right on the cusp of the presidential election to build momentum for other either factions of the two main parties or to get momentum. A Green Party, as often they're called in Europe, was something worth trying in the long run. But we're not playing a long run right now. We're just playing now till November 8th. That's all that matters. I would just die if enough people decided they were going to protest or vote for one of the marginal candidates or stay home and not vote at all. Suddenly out of the ashes shows up President Trump, and you can't imagine the trouble this country would be in if that happens. So we can't risk that under any circumstances. And the time comes afterwards to start building better constituencies within the parties we have, not now.
You spoke of Italy having a third-party system that doesn't even work so well anyway. Do you think that maybe more important than the third party is to sort of clean up the problem of money in politics in the system that we have now, that should supersede even the idea of spending time and energy on a third party? What thoughts on that?
I've never in my life seen such open criticism of the Supreme Court decision, even by the President of the United States in the State of the Union address, called out the Supreme Court for the Citizens United decision. I've never seen that in my life on any topic ever. That is so widely been considered as a disastrous Supreme Court decision. It's just unparalleled. You'd like to imagine a reasonably substantial turnover of the Supreme Court in the next few years, and a similar sort of case could come before them, and they could start a new precedent, because that's our best hope for immediate improvement of our electioneering, getting the big money out of American politics, and getting the money to the Senate so it's transparent. And that's something that I think is doable and really needs to be fought for. And what's funny is everybody except the Supreme Court